I still remember the way the world felt in the early 2000s. The internet wasn't as slick and polished as it is now. There weren't endless security prompts or AI-powered fraud detectors watching your every click. It was messy, a little wild, and still carried that sense of adventure. Like you could stumble across something life-changing on a forum at 2 in the morning, or in the depths of an eBay listing buried on page 7. Back then, I was the kind of person who believed in the good in people. I'm not saying I was naive, but I didn't walk around expecting people to stab me in the back for a quick buck. Maybe it was the way I was raised. Small-town values, where your word was everything. Or maybe I'd just been lucky up until that point. I'd bought and sold dozens of things online, without ever so much as a hiccup. That's why, when I decided I needed a new video camera, I didn't think twice about heading straight to eBay. It wasn't just any video camera I was after. I'd been saving for months, extra shifts, fewer nights eating out, and selling off a few old collectibles I'd been holding onto for sentimental reasons. My plan was to document family gatherings, road trips, and maybe even start a little passion project of my own. Something like a short documentary. Cameras like that were expensive, especially the model I wanted. The Sony DCR-VX2000. Not exactly a household name, but among people who knew cameras, it was a legend. Back then, it was the kind of thing that made you feel like a professional just by holding it. I remember the night I found the listing. I'd been browsing for weeks, watching auctions, checking seller ratings obsessively. Then I saw it, a Dutch auction of all things. The listing claimed the seller had 5 of these cameras, all brand new, all starting at a price way lower than I'd ever seen. I knew how Dutch auctions worked. You put in your maximum bid, and the top bidders get the items. The catch was, you had to be quick and confident, because hesitation could cost you your spot. The seller's profile looked solid. Dozens of positive reviews, no glaring red flags. Sure, the reviews were all for buying, not selling, but at the time that didn't seem strange. Maybe they were just transitioning into selling after collecting things for a while. I remember thinking, he's got a track record. He knows how eBay works. I didn't realize that those good reviews were the first part of the con. I put in my bid, heart pounding in that stupid irrational way it does when you're buying something online. It's ridiculous when you think about it. I was sitting in my own living room, safe and warm, yet it felt like I was standing in the middle of some high-stakes poker game. I refreshed the page like a maniac, until the auction ended. And then there it was. You've won. It felt good. Better than good. That camera wasn't just a purchase. It was a milestone. It represented work patience, and a little bit of calculated risk. I remember imagining the unboxing. I could see myself peeling back the tape, lifting the flaps, smelling that new electronic smell. Sharp, plasticky, and a little chemical, but comforting in its own way. The payment went through without a hitch. I sent it via PayPal, back when even that didn't have as many protections as today. I got a short confirmation from the seller, thanking me for my purchase, promising quick shipment. Everything seemed perfect. The first red flag didn't smack me in the face. It whispered. The tracking number he sent didn't work the first time I checked it. I told myself, maybe it just hasn't updated yet. 2 days passed. Still nothing. I emailed him again. No reply for 24 hours. Then a short vague message saying, "Don't worry. It's on the way." I pushed down the unease. The mind does this strange thing when it's invested in a decision. It tries to protect you from the possibility you've made a mistake. I didn't want to believe I'd just sent a large sum of money to a stranger for nothing. A week later, an email from another bidder appeared in my inbox. They had somehow found my contact info through the auction page. Their message was short. "Hey, did you get your camera yet? I think something's wrong. Seller's not responding. Heard he only had 1 camera, but sold to multiple people." My stomach dropped. I reread the message half a dozen times, hoping I'd misunderstood, but I hadn't. I replied, and within hours, I was in an impromptu chain of emails with several of the winners. The story unfolded fast. The seller had shipped a single camera, to the highest bidder. The rest of us, we were out of luck. No shipment, no refunds, no explanations. I went back to the seller's page. His account was still active, but now there were negative reviews pouring in like water through a broken dam. The profile that had seemed so trustworthy just a week earlier was rotting before my eyes. I contacted eBay. The process was slow, frustrating, and impersonal. They had limited buyer protections back then, especially for Dutch auctions. By the time I filed my claim, the money was long gone. PayPal wasn't much help either. Their policy windows were short, and he'd played his timing perfectly. That's when I learned the truth. He had been building up his account for 6 months, buying cheap, easy-to-ship items just to rack up positive feedback. He never intended to be a long-term seller. His plan was to make one big hit, sell a few high-ticket items he didn't own, and disappear. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. I was in that stunned, surreal phase where your brain is still trying to catch up with reality. I kept telling myself there had to be a misunderstanding, that maybe he'd explain everything and make it right. But as the days passed and my inbox stayed empty, the truth solidified into something sharp and bitter. It wasn't just the money, though losing that much hurt. It was the violation. I'd been careful. I'd done my homework, and I still got taken. Worse, he was out there somewhere, probably laughing about the whole thing, ready to do it again to someone else. I didn't know it yet, but that was the start of a chain of events that would pull me into one of the strangest, most oddly satisfying acts of revenge I'd ever be part of. At the time, though, all I could think about was the fact that I had nothing to show for my months of saving, except an empty bank account, and a confirmation email that now felt like a cruel joke. And the more I thought about it, the more something started to shift inside me. I'd always been the kind of person who let things go, the take the high road type. But there was something about this scam, about the way he'd manipulated trust, about the deliberate planning, that made my blood run hot in a way I couldn't shake. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't going to end with me quietly licking my wounds. Not this time. It's strange how certain days stay burned into your memory, not because something beautiful happened, but because that's the day something inside you broke and reshaped itself. For me, that day was September 14th. 2003, a Sunday. The air outside still had that sticky late summer heat, but there was an edge of autumn trying to sneak in. I remember because I'd left the window open while sitting at my desk, and the sound of cicadas was drowning out the hum of my computer. I was scrolling through my email for the 10th time that morning, still hoping, ridiculously, for some kind of explanation from the seller. Nothing. The last message he'd sent was a week old. "Don't worry. It's on the way." 7 bland little words that now felt like a mocking echo. I tried distracting myself, did some laundry, made a cup of coffee I barely drank. But every time I stopped moving, my mind drifted back to it. This wasn't just an unfortunate online transaction. This was theft. Calculated, premeditated theft. And I had his name. That was the strange thing. In those days, sellers' personal details were easier to access after a sale. His name, his address, his small town location in Texas. All of it was right there in my purchase confirmation. I'd been holding on to that info for days without fully realizing its power. I'd never been to Texas. In my mind, it was all big skies, barbecue smoke, and wide streets baking under the sun. But when I looked at that address, I pictured something smaller, quieter, a place where people knew each other's business, where gossip traveled faster than the mail. At first, I thought about mailing him a letter, something direct, maybe even threatening, but not illegal. But the more I pictured him reading it, the more pointless it felt. A scammer like that wouldn't be scared by words on a page. He'd probably crumple it up and toss it without a second thought. I needed something that would stick, something that would make his own town see him for what he was. That's when the idea hit me. The local paper. Every small town has one. The kind that prints stories about high school football scores and city council meetings, with classifieds in the back for lawnmowers and used cars. If I could get them to print the truth, everyone he knew would see it. It felt almost too bold, too personal, like stepping into his front yard with a megaphone. But bold was exactly what I needed. I looked up the paper online. It had one of those simple early 2000s websites with grainy header images, and a contact us link that led to a single email address. I wrote out my story in detail. The auction, the payment, the disappearing act. I included his name, and the town. I hit send before I could second guess myself. The reply came the next day. It was polite but blunt. They couldn't print a letter that directly accused someone of a crime without hard proof beyond my word. Libel laws, they said. But then came the part that changed everything. If you approach it from a broader angle, the editor wrote, you might be able to get it published. Write about the need for stronger protections against online fraud. And you can mention that you personally were a victim. Leave your contact information so readers can reach out if they want more details. At first, I wasn't sure it would work, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how clever it was. This way, the story wouldn't just be about him. It would be about a bigger problem that affected people everywhere. And anyone curious enough could email me for the specifics. So I rewrote it. I poured in all the frustration I'd been holding back. I wrote about how easy it was for people to build fake credibility online. How the laws hadn't caught up with the digital world. How victims like me had no real recourse. And then, like the editor suggested, I slid in a single casual line. Oh, and by the way, I was personally scammed by a man from your town. If you'd like to know his name, email me at this address. I created a fresh throwaway email just for the occasion. I sent it off, and within a week, my letter was printed in the opinion section. I don't know what I expected. Maybe one or two curious locals reaching out. What happened was something else entirely. The first email came less than 24 hours after the paper hit mailboxes. Then another, and another. By the end of the second day, I had a dozen messages, all from people in that little Texas town. Some were polite, just asking for the name. Others were already suspicious, writing things like, "I bet I know exactly who you mean." And when I confirmed it, the responses ranged from amused to downright gleeful. It turned out this guy, my scammer, already had a bit of a reputation, not necessarily for big crimes, but for being, as one person put it, a skeevy piece of work. People told me he'd bounced between jobs, borrowing money he never repaid, getting into petty trouble. One woman said she'd worked with him at a hardware store, and wouldn't trust him to watch her lunch, let alone her wallet. And then came the real kicker. Someone emailed to say they'd driven by his grandmother's house, and told her about what he'd done. Just like that, no hesitation, no holding back. I pictured her, some sweet older woman, sitting in her living room, blinds half drawn against the sun, getting blindsided with the news that her grandson was scamming strangers online. I almost felt bad. Almost. I hadn't asked anyone to take action. I'd just told my story. But in a town that size, gossip was gasoline. And I'd lit the match. The satisfaction I felt was complicated. On one hand, I still didn't have my camera or my money back. But on the other, I knew he was squirming. Maybe he could shrug off an angry email from a stranger states away. But facing your neighbors, your coworkers, your family, that was different. That was personal. And for the first time since the whole mess started, I felt the balance shift. He'd taken something from me, and now I was taking something from him. His anonymity, his ability to hide behind a screen name, and a string of lies. It wasn't revenge in the Hollywood sense. There were no grand confrontations, no dramatic showdowns, but it was real, it was messy, and it was just getting started. Because once you've felt that first taste of justice, even the smallest bit, it's hard to stop. After the letter was published, and the emails started flooding in, I expected things to settle down eventually. I figured the initial buzz would fade, maybe the scammer would lay low for a while, and I'd be left to pick up the pieces of my own life. But as I quickly learned, when you poke a hornet's nest in a small town, the sting lasts far longer than you imagine. For days after the paper hit the streets, my inbox felt like a hotline. People I'd never met before, neighbors, former coworkers, even distant relatives of this guy, all reaching out. Some shared stories I couldn't have guessed. A stolen lawnmower here, unpaid debts there, a few tales of drunken bar fights and shady deals. The picture that emerged was less of a one-time scammer, and more of a pattern. A guy who'd been skating on the edge of trustworthiness for years, never quite caught, but always slipping. The more I heard, the more I realized that I wasn't just angry about a lost camera anymore. I was furious about being the latest chapter in a long story of lies and broken promises. There was something deeply unsettling about being a footnote in someone else's pattern of deception. On the flip side, some emails showed surprising sympathy. One woman wrote, saying she'd lost a sibling to addiction, and knew all about how small towns could swallow people whole and spit them back out. She urged me to focus on healing, rather than revenge. warning me how easy it was to get trapped in bitterness. Another email came from a man who said he was a lawyer in Texas and offered to help me explore legal options, even if the money seemed gone. I appreciated their kindness, but honestly, I wasn't ready to move on or to forgive. Not yet. I wasn't the kind of person who sought out revenge for the thrill of it. But this felt different. This was about standing up to someone who'd taken advantage of the system, and of people like me who tried to do the right thing. Meanwhile, back in that small Texas town, things were shifting in ways I could only follow from thousands of miles away. I kept getting updates from my new pen pals, neighbors who told me how the scammer was suddenly quieter at the hardware store, how his truck was being talked about more in hushed tones than usual. One person even said he'd started getting calls at odd hours, asking questions about his side business. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, but large enough that nobody wanted to get involved openly. I imagined him, this man I'd never met, trying to navigate streets where people glanced at him sideways, whispers trailing behind him like shadows. For once, he couldn't hide behind a username or a screen. But I wasn't immune to the fallout either. I'd always thought revenge was something you did and then moved past. But this experience tangled itself into the edges of my everyday life. I'd lie awake some nights, my mind spinning through what-ifs. What if I'd been more careful? What if I'd spotted the red flags sooner? What if I'd just walked away instead of trying to fight back? Those thoughts weren't productive, but they haunted me anyway. Work became harder. I'm not proud of this, but for a while I found it difficult to focus. Every time I opened my email or read the news about new online scams, it felt like a punch in the gut. I started avoiding sites like eBay altogether. The place that had once felt like a treasure trove, now a minefield. My relationships took a hit too. I became less trusting in general. Friends noticed I was more guarded, less willing to share personal details. I caught myself double-checking their intentions, wondering if I was just projecting my experience onto them. It's funny how one bad experience can cloud your view of the world like that. At home, my family tried to be supportive, but didn't quite get it. It's just money, my sister said once, shaking her head. You can make more. Don't let this ruin you. But I knew it wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about feeling like the world was a place where I could stand my ground and expect others to do the same. Amid all that, there was a strange, unexpected sense of connection to the town where the scammer lived. I never visited, and probably never would, but through the emails and the stories, it felt like I was part of that community too. In a strange, indirect way, the small town gossip, the grudges, the loyalty to neighbors, even the way people looked out for their elders. It made me wonder about the duality of people, how one person can be a villain in one story and a grandson or coworker in another. One of the most surreal moments came when an older woman sent me a photo. It was a snapshot of a modest, weathered house with a neatly trimmed lawn, the scammer's grandmother's place. The woman who sent it had visited there herself, said she wanted to see the place for closure, or maybe just curiosity. I stared at the picture for a long time, imagining the woman inside, unaware or unwilling to confront the truth about her grandson. I felt a complicated knot of sympathy and anger tighten inside me. It was unfair to drag innocent people into this mess, but sometimes justice wasn't neat. Eventually, I realized that even if I never got my money back, I'd won something. Maybe not a prize you can hold in your hands, but a victory of sorts. The scammer was no longer invisible, no longer a ghost behind a fake account. He was a man with a name, a reputation, and consequences, however small, for his actions. And that knowledge was like a lifeline when I felt myself sinking in bitterness. Still, I wasn't sure where to go from there. Was this enough? Was exposing him and making a few people uncomfortable the limit of what I could do? Or was there more? More justice, more closure, maybe even more revenge? The answer came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while scrolling through emails, I found a message with a subject line that simply read, "Got some info for you." It was from a local, a man who'd promised to keep things discreet. Attached was a short dossier, a collection of photos of the scammer's car, his workplace, and even a few personal details I wouldn't have been able to find on my own. He'd also included a warning: be careful, this guy's trouble. But now that everyone's watching, he might try to run. That message lit a fire inside me. I realized that this wasn't just about a camera anymore. It was about standing up, speaking out, and not letting people like him get away with it. I started thinking about the next steps. How could I use what I'd learned? How could I take this from a personal story to something that actually mattered, that might even protect others? But there was a voice in my head, the one that warned me not to cross a line, to be careful not to become what I hated, to keep my sense of morality intact, even while seeking justice. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't done. After receiving that email with the photos and info about the scammer's daily life, something inside me changed. It wasn't just about being angry anymore. It was about taking control. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was moving forward, not just reacting but acting. I spent nights piecing together everything I knew: his name, his address, his workplace, his car model, even tidbits about his family from the locals who'd reached out. The mosaic painted a man who lived on the edge of respectability, someone clinging to whatever scraps of reputation he could salvage. But it was clear he wasn't prepared for the spotlight. I started thinking strategically. What could I actually do? Sue him? Too expensive and complicated, and the odds were against me. Report him to the authorities? I tried, but cybercrime laws were barely a blip on the radar back then. The system wasn't built for this kind of digital deception, especially across state lines. No, my path wasn't legal. It was social. It was about exposure, accountability, holding him to the court of public opinion in his own town. I wasn't looking for blood, but I wanted him to feel what it meant to be seen, judged, and hopefully, shamed enough to stop. I sent more emails to the local paper, this time with concrete details, urging them to run a series on online scams, featuring my story as a case study. I even suggested they reach out to local law enforcement to investigate, or at least raise awareness. To my surprise, they responded quickly and enthusiastically. The series ran in 3 parts over several weeks, bringing the small Texas town's attention back to the man behind the scams. Letters poured into the editor again, some from people angry, some from those glad to see justice catching up. One letter even came from the local sheriff's office, acknowledging that they were looking into the matter. Meanwhile, I kept corresponding with townspeople. One of them, a young woman who worked at the hardware store, confided in me that he'd started avoiding work, showing up late, and growing more withdrawn. She wasn't proud of what she was doing, but said she felt it was the right thing to stand up to him. The more I learned, the more I realized that this was about more than just me or my stolen camera. It was about a culture of accountability, about people refusing to look the other way when someone took advantage of their neighbors. But as the months passed, I also wrestled with darker feelings. Revenge wasn't a simple story of good versus bad. Sometimes it was messy, confusing, and even a little scary. I found myself questioning whether what I was doing was right. Had I crossed a line? Was I justified in digging up dirt on this man's life and exposing it? What if he was struggling with more than I knew? What if my actions pushed him into a worse place? I remembered those emails from strangers, urging forgiveness and empathy, and I realized they weren't just platitudes. They were warnings to keep my heart from hardening. At the same time, I couldn't forget the way I'd felt when the scam first hit. The helplessness, the betrayal, the loss of trust. That sting didn't fade easily. It kept fueling my drive, but it also clouded my judgment at times. I talked it over with a close friend, someone who knew the whole story. They reminded me that justice and revenge aren't the same, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, and not letting someone else's actions define you. That was hard to swallow. Part of me wanted a neat, satisfying ending, a confrontation, a confession, maybe even a full refund. But real life rarely works that way. In the end, I realized that turning the tables wasn't about making him suffer forever. It was about reclaiming my own power. It was about saying, I refuse to be your victim. It was about finding a way to make something good come from the pain. I started volunteering for online consumer protection groups, sharing my story to help others avoid the trap I'd fallen into. I worked with forums and communities, warning people about scammers and teaching them how to spot red flags. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. It felt like healing. That chapter of my life taught me lessons that stuck about vigilance, resilience, and the importance of community in fighting back against wrongdoing. And as much as I wanted to close the book on that scammer, part of me knew that my story, and his, would stay with me forever. Years have passed since that summer of 2003 when I first clicked buy now on that Dutch auction. When I look back, it's almost surreal how a single scam reshaped so many parts of my life, not just the immediate loss, but the trust, the relationships, and the way I saw the world. That camera, I never got it. I never saw it. It remains a ghost, a symbol of something stolen, but also a catalyst for something much bigger. What I did get was a story. A messy, complicated story about human nature, justice, and the blurry line between right and wrong. I sometimes wonder what happened to that man from Texas. Did he ever face real consequences beyond whispers and sideways glances? Did he change, or did he just move on to the next mark? Those questions have no easy answers. Small towns are paradoxes. They protect and expose, they shelter and judge. In a place like that, you're never truly invisible. But at the same time, people can disappear quietly if they choose. For me, the biggest victory wasn't the public shaming or the emails from strangers. It was reclaiming my sense of agency. I learned that even when the system fails you, you can still find ways to fight back. There were times when bitterness threatened to consume me, when I replayed every detail of the scam, and every moment I'd felt powerless. But slowly, I turned that anger into something constructive, helping others avoid scams, sharing my experience, and building awareness. That became my new mission. It didn't erase the past, but it gave the pain purpose. Sometimes, I think about forgiveness, not the kind that forgets or dismisses harm, but the kind that frees you from carrying it forever. I'm still working on that. And maybe that's the real story, not the scam itself, but the journey through betrayal, hurt, and the slow, painful path toward healing. So if you're listening to this and have ever been taken advantage of, whether by a stranger online or someone close to you, know that you're not alone. It hurts, it shakes you, but it can also make you stronger, wiser, and more determined. Revenge, I learned, isn't about tearing someone down, it's about rising up. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't a thing you do to someone else, it's the way you choose to live your life after.